Science can tell us a certain amount about unlimited love, but it's limited to a significant degree. And I don't like to reduce love to social scientific measurements.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Helping with Dr. Richard Schuster. Food for the brain, knowledge from the experts, tools to win at life. I'm your host, Dr. Richard. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, and whatever you do, this is the show that is going to help you become the best version of yourself. Each episode, you will hear from some of the most amazing, talented, and successful people on the planet who followed their passions and strive to help others. Join our movement to get 1 million people each day to commit acts of kindness for others. Together, we're going to make the world a better place. Are you ready? Because it's time for your Daily Helping. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Daily Helping Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Richard, and I am so excited about today's guest because this episode is so needed. Because these are times of cultural unrest, social change, political divides that are ripping us apart. Such times come and go in every era, but how do we cultivate inner peace and foster pure, unlimited love regardless of what is going on around us? As president and co-founder with Sir John Templeton of the Institute for Research on Pure Unlimited Love and the director for the Center of Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics at the Renaissance School of Medicine at the Stony Brook University, Dr. Stephen G. Post has spent more than 40 years researching cultural transformation grounded in the integration of scientific research, spiritual philosophical insight, and compassionate action. He's here to talk to us about his newest book, Pure Unlimited Love, Science and the 7 Paths to Inner Peace, which is available everywhere, to shed some light on all this. This is a really exciting book, forward written by the Dalai Lama, which is wild. Dr. Stephen G. Post, welcome to the Daily Helping. I am so grateful you're with us today.
Well, thank you for a generous introduction, Dr. Richard. I'm glad to meet you, and I look forward to our conversation.
It's going to be great. So before we get into the book, and I know you've got 40 years of research that you draw upon for this book, talk to us a little bit about what put you on the path you're on today.
The origin story. Well, I've been interested in this since I was a high school kid up in New Hampshire and was writing on the topic of love, not love for chocolate or designer jeans, but something more profound. I was always reading a lot of material from world religions. I was enjoying nature up there in Concord, New Hampshire. I was at an Episcopal high school called St. Paul's, which was a beautiful place. And I had some good mentors. So ever since, I've been thinking about trying to act upon and write about unselfish love. I had the good fortune of encountering Sir John Templeton some years ago, really about 1990. And we became close friends. And he once upon a time faxed me. He liked fax better than email. I think felt he was too old for the email systems, but he thought the fax was the greatest thing ever invented. And he faxed me in my office at Case Western Med School. And he said, Stephen, we need to start an institute to apply the best methods of science that we have to study the greatest human spiritual asset, and that would be pure unlimited love. And I faxed back, Sir John, I like the idea, but maybe the title could be adjusted. How about creative altruism? Because altruism is a little more sciencey and dry. And so he faxed back, well, I think unlimited love up to $8.9 million. And I faxed back immediately, Sir John, I love that language. It seems to jump right off the page, and we are in business.
So interesting. And isn't it fascinating, though, that difference in nomenclature, right? Altruism versus unlimited love. How would you differentiate those two?
Well, altruism is pro-social activity. activity on behalf of others, it doesn't have quite the depth of pure unlimited love. So love, which I think more people can relate to, it's less sciency. It has to do with the security and well-being of others being as real or meaningful to us as our own, and sometimes more so. That's my definition in the introduction to the book. But what is pure unlimited love? That goes beyond simple human interactions, and it suggests something more, something metaphysical, something transcendental. And so one of my friends here, Jeff Trilling, who had been the chair of family medicine for 30 years, and he's very mystical. I asked Jeff, what do you think pure unlimited love is? And he said, pure unlimited love is the first thing you see when you close your eyes for the last time, hopefully. And I love that. It's in the book. It just suggests that we're dealing with something that has much more of a universal cosmic quality to it, and maybe is the underlying energy of all of reality. So when Sir John was dying, Sir John was dying in Lyford Key, which is in Nassau in the Bahamas. And this was in 2008. His son, Jack Templeton, called me on my flip phone and he said, Dad is dying. And I said, I'm very sorry. And then he asked me, well, he has a little chore for you. And I said, well, what is it? And Jack said he'd like you to write a book because he only has a week to live and he doesn't have time to write it. So I was, of course, astonished that he would entrust me to do that. And I was hesitant. So I said, Jack, did he give you a title? And Jack said, as a matter of fact, he did. The title is Unlimited Love is Ultimate Reality, which is kind of bold. So I said, Jack, would you go back to Sir John and ask him if we could have a question mark? Because that would make it a little easier for me. I wouldn't have to prove things, but I could go on the basis of plausibility. And so Jack came back a few minutes later and he said, yeah, Dad says, is ultimate reality unlimited love? Question mark is okay. And I wrote that book for the Templeton Foundation with a lot of Sir John's ideas, not trying to take off in different directions. And I've always been very content with Sir John's thinking. They called him the Tennessee mystic for a reason.
So this is interesting because when you talked about love, and certainly unlimited love versus altruism, you said altruism's a little more sciencey. By that, it's probably a little more measurable, right? Like if we buy somebody's groceries or give $100 to somebody who's, homeless and they're begging for money, that's an act that's observable, measurable, dare I say repeatable, to throw some science in there. But unlimited love, and you mentioned that it has this more mystical grounding, yet you've been, at the Institute studying this for many, many years. So talk to us a little bit about what science tells us about unlimited love.
Every chapter in this book has at least a decent dose of science. Science can tell us a certain amount about unlimited love, but it's limited to a significant degree. And I don't like to reduce love to social scientific measurements because in the end, something is lost. There is a mystery about love. So we can try to measure it, and people do. Altruism, you mentioned altruism. So there's so many different foundations for altruism. The rescuers at 9/11 were what I call role altruists because they were firemen, because they were policemen. They were expected to rush down to Wall Street and dig people out of the rubble, although there weren't too many people who could be dug out very easily. And I actually went down to Wall Street at the invitation of the people from a big Episcopal church there, Trinity, and spent a week during that period. And these were wonderful folks. They were sleeping on the pews. They were out and about helping as much as they could. but it was ultimately frustrating for them. But their motivation was essentially, this is my job, and that's why I'm doing it. There may have been some variation, but it was not empathic. Now, His Holiness the Dalai Lama talks mainly about compassionate love, which is rooted in an emotional and affective quality of people. It can be related to meditational techniques, but for the most part, it's an affective love for others that is manifested in helping behaviors, hopefully, to eliminate the source of their suffering. So that's what compassion is. And His Holiness doesn't like a lot of the discussion of compassion because it sounds like it's just sort of a way that people begin to feel good about themselves, but it loses that altruistic dimension. So I like His Holiness. I think that compassionate love is a form of altruism, but it's very different than role altruism. And there are other forms of altruism too that I won't. There's purely cognitive altruism. So the Kantians write books about rational altruism. And that basically says, look, if you think for 1 minute that there's a reason why people like you are worth caring about and people who are not like you are less worth caring about, think again, because it makes no sense. What you think makes the difference really makes no difference at all. So Kant and all the Kantians push us as hard as possible to be analytic and to blow those sorts of intrinsic biases to smithereens through rationality. And certainly the utilitarians are the same way. They have their mega principle, do unto others as you know. Well, I'm sorry, the greatest happiness to the greatest number. I don't really think that those purely rationalistic approaches make much sense. They're not very enduring, they're not very deep. So I like the empathic and the compassionate approach. But empathy itself is not altruistic necessarily, because I've known lots of people who are very empathic, but for mischievous reasons. It's even said that Hitler was extremely empathic, and he was. He could give speeches and he could connect with lots of people very easily and build a whole movement. But for what purpose? I don't think we'd call them compassionate. And that is certainly something that we need if we're going to talk about pure, unlimited love. And the word pure is important because a lot of times, even, I have two kids, you have two kids, I think. Even our parental love, it's the best we could do, but it's far from perfect and far from pure. And, we want to raise kind children. There's a chapter in the book, May You Raise Kind Children. But nevertheless, 98% of American parents confess that they have screamed bloody murder at their very young children for no good reason at all. That's in a book called Scream Free Parenting. And sometimes we overindulge our kids. We teach them that only the nearest and the dearest matter, or people who look like them and sound like them. And in fact, that's counterproductive because we need to do certain things to allow them to lean outward toward a shared humanity and not inward in a myopic sense. So how to raise kind children is not so simple. And there's a lot of good science in that chapter. Overall, human love is flawed. I'm just not a great big believer in human love. We do the best we can. I have these wonderful anecdotes that are my favorites in life in this book. And one of them is the great poet W.H. Auden. So Auden, who sort of taught in a private school north of Oxford, he was a very deep person. He was not religious. He wasn't even a practicing Anglican when this occurred, but it did change his life. And so let me just see if I can dig this up. Here it is. This is one paragraph. One fine night in June 1933, I was sitting on the lawn after dinner with 3 colleagues, 2 women and 1 man. We liked each other well enough, but were certainly not intimate friends. We had no sexual interest in another. Incidentally, we had not drunk any alcohol. We were talking casually about everyday matters when, quite suddenly and unexpectedly, something happened. I felt myself invaded by a power which, though I consented to it, was irresistible and certainly not mine. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly, because thanks to the power I was doing it, what it means to love one's neighbor as oneself. And it ends, I'll skip some lines here. My personal feelings toward them were unchanged. They were still colleagues, not intimate friends, but I felt their existence as themselves to be of infinite value, and I rejoiced in it. So that's even more than compassionate love. That's really an invasive spiritual love. And there are many people, including recipients of the Templeton Prize, like Mother Teresa, who have given their testimony about being invaded in that sense, feeling invaded. And I've had that experience several times, really, even in college. I still have it from time to time. So it's the sense that we are not really the source of that level of altruism, but rather that it sort of feeds itself through us. So I think altruism is a challenging term because there are so many very, very different forms of altruism. My dad got the Navy medal. He was in charge of building the submarine net in New York Harbor just before Roosevelt declared war on the Germans. And one of the workers fell into the icy waters of New York Harbor and was drowning. And my father jumped into the waves and pulled him out. Henry A.V. Post, you can Google it, it's online. And I would ask my dad, well, you got the Navy medal, non combat, for saving this guy. Did you think of yourself as altruistic? He said, no, I was in the Navy and that's what we do. End of story. And I said, did you ever visit this fellow later? Were you a good Samaritan? Did you make sure that he got good treatment at the local hospital or whatever it might be? None of that. Dad didn't do any of that. Now, my father was a good man and he was a great naval officer, but his altruism was different than compassionate altruism. And he was not deeply spiritual. This was, well, I had my duties because I was a naval guy, and you help your friends.
It's duty versus acts of compassion. Like you said, there's different definitions of it. It's very deep. Could probably spend a whole hour just talking about that, but I want to circle back to the book a little bit. The subtitle of the book is Science and the Seven Paths to Inner Peace. And before we talk about what those seven paths are, how did you arrive at that number? How did you determine that there are seven paths?
Well, I think there are probably more than seven paths, and I think there's room for discussion about this. So I'm not claiming that this is the be all and end all. However, it happens to be the case, Dr. Richard, that over the years, the Institute for Research on Pure Unlimited Love, which I founded, as you mentioned, with Sir John, that we tended to focus our energies on these particular paths. Sir John thought they were important. I thought they were important. And I still think they are. So the first one, all pretty obvious, may you give and glow. And there is lots of discussion, some of which we developed initially on the helper's high, on how people who help others feel better about themselves, better about life, something that you've worked on a lot. I did a national survey with United Healthcare, the big managed care system. At least they called me and they used me as an advisor. And this was in early 2010. So it was a while back. And we wanted to do a national survey of adults who, in the year prior, in 2009, had volunteered. Turns out 41% had volunteered. And it was a rough year because that was the 2009 was the big financial debacle. And so a very high proportion of people managed that by volunteering. Now, how much were they volunteering? 41% of Americans, not a whole lot, 100 hours a year on average. And that means you can break it down maybe a couple of hours a week. And then we asked them positive psychology questions. I'm a positive psychologist of known Martin Seligman for many years, and all the great positive psychologists are my good friends. So 73% said volunteering lowered my stress levels. That's pretty good. Chronic stress is a problem. 89% improved my sense of well-being. 92% enriched my sense of purpose in life. A couple more here. 68% made me feel physically healthier. 77% improves emotional health, and 78% volunteering helps recovery from loss and disappointment. So we did a little study of widows and widowers, and we asked them, could they self-report helping others and volunteering during their period immediately after the loss of their loved one? And it was very interesting. The ones who said that they were helping others a great deal, the high quartile helpers, were getting through grief and bereavement much more quickly and in an enduring fashion. The low quartile helpers, it was the opposite. And so I got a phone call from the New York Society of Widows and Widowers. There is such a thing. They were having their annual convention, and they wanted me to give a talk. So I went into New York City to some big hotel, a ballroom there, and it was pretty well full. And I gave a talk about these intrinsic benefits. It's not tit for tat, it's not transactional benefits, but it's about the internal benefits, emotional and otherwise, that can be measured. And I thought it was a pretty good talk. But of course, there was a guy in the back of the room, and he was frantically waving his hands. And he said, I don't care what you say, buddy. I don't do nothing for nothing. That's a quote. And that just shows you that there's this ideology in our culture that if you do something for nothing, you're a sucker. And that's very pervasive, and it prevents a lot of people from discovering what's intrinsically within them because somehow they're embarrassed by it. And so I think it's very important to kind of blow up that myth and help people be free to be good and to know that it's good to be good.
Well, and not only that, Stephen, the research is alarmingly showing that as particularly in younger people, because of technology like social media and cell phones, we're becoming more selfish as a society than we ever have been before, which is further limiting the call to helping others. So may you give and glow. I love that. The second one,
May you heal with kindness. May you
yes.
heal with kindness. It's related to this. But also, it's the third chapter is may you follow your callings. Because what is a calling but utilizing your gifts and your talents to the benefit of some identifiable constituency? Shakespeare and Picasso both said the same thing about this. And so a calling allows you to give and glow over the course of a lifetime. And I think you do a certain amount of that, Dr. Richard. I think you're giving and glowing with your podcast. And look, I've never felt despondent. I've never had to say to myself, thank God it's Friday, because what I've been doing in my workplace in medical schools at Chicago, Ann Arbor, Case, Stony Brook, teaching compassionate care, that's the happiest moment of my life, but it never ends. So I'm very pleased. But you want to have a calling so that you can give and glow right till your last breath, if possible.
I love that. That is a sentiment I share. I mean, full disclosure, Steve and I are recording this episode the morning of Thanksgiving. So I'm so grateful for so many things in my life, but this is an honor to me to be able to do this. And I don't view this as taking away, an hour from my day. This is enhancing my day. That's my worldview because I love what I do and my actions drive me towards helping others. So thank you for that.
But as far as the kids go, you mentioned the kids on their contraptions.
Yes.
So I went to Reed College in Portland, Oregon, which is a kind of a far out college on the West Coast. And Steve Jobs was there for a year. And he once slept on my floor. And we read the autobiography of a yogi. He also was a great calligrapher, which is why the font for Apple is so nice. And he was interested in the history of science. So there was a course there called Alchemy 101 that he did very, very well with, sort of combined medieval science and modern quantum physics. So I just have to say that I had an interesting time with him. He would, of course, go on and invent all sorts of white plastic devices. But, he himself was a naturalist. He would disappear on Thursday afternoons and go north of Portland to the apple orchards. That's how Apple got its name, by the way. And there were no apple picking machines way back then. I won't tell you how old I am, but I'm getting up there. And it was all done by hand. So he would just spend 2 or 3 days picking apples, standing on little ladders. And he would come back to college and he'd have a big bag of apples for everybody and a pocket full of money to get him through the week because his parents were usually pretty broke. And he would be very happy. That's when he was really happiest. So I think that there's now something, it's not part of formal psychiatric nosology or definition of illness, as they say, but it's being used a lot. Nature deficit disorder. I sometimes stop by the psychiatric emergency unit here, not as an inpatient, although maybe the time will come, but just to see what's going on. And I see so many younger people who are just so tied to their contraptions and they're not really interacting because real social interaction has a physical dimension to it. I mean, you get the feel of another person, you get the feel of their heart, you know what they smell like, you know the details of their complexion, you just know how they act. You relate to a real whole person, not some sort of video facsimile. And that's a problem because we weren't designed to relate strictly on the level of computers. And now, there's a guy at the University of California, San Francisco, who is Googleable, and he's come up with this term AI psychosis. And Google, this is in the newspapers everywhere, Google is being sued. I don't know if it'll be successful, but by a whole number of families whose kids have killed themselves. And they had no history of depression or bipolar or any kind of psychiatric illness, but they were locked in to the chat, if you will, and they were talking with these AI systems about what's maybe on their mind. And the AI system, which is just a machine, it doesn't have love. Okay. It's just purely a cognitive thing. It would walk them down this path over a period of months to the point where it would recommend suicide. And, this has to be taken very seriously. And I'm sorry to say it, but, this is something that AI creators need to take seriously into account. And there need to be warnings for sure. And the guy who got the Nobel Prize, the physicist and computer scientist who worked for Google, Hansen, he quit Google because he decided there was nothing we could ever do as a human species to control this level of intelligence. So he's now back at the University of Toronto and he's teaching. So we have not got this under control and it could take us down a very difficult path. We need to rescue our kids. Now, I'm in a medical school and they have tried to develop approaches to regulating AI, but it's extremely difficult. And I have to tell you, this is how bad I am. Okay. I'm being honest. I probably need some help. But I remember being down at Emory University in Atlanta with an old friend of mine, now passed. He was an ethicist named Paul Ramsey from Princeton. And he gave his final talk about how, and this was when people were just beginning to use email. Okay. He thought it was very troubling because you weren't sitting down in the faculty room or actually having conversations with people in real time and in real life. He said, we are going to look back at a time in history when we all felt graphite on those pads of yellow paper. And it was that feeling of graphite that allowed us to internalize information. That's the thing I worry about too. I don't see students anywhere internalizing information. They know where to get it. They know where to find it. This is my opinion, but they know everything about how to find something out, but they're not internalizing it. And a lot of memory is somatic. That's what Paul Ramsey was talking about. It's somatic. And when you are writing things down like we did when we were kids on that paper, it was really profound, actually. We take it for granted. But now we don't have that. And so I still use a pen and pencil.
Dr. Richard here. What a great interview with Dr. Stephen G. Post. The man is just so full of wisdom. Come back next episode where we're going to finish talking about the 7 paths to inner peace. We'll see you next time.